May the words of my mouth and the thoughts of our hearts be pleasing to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. After many summers, year after year, where my family would spend a few days at Ocean City, Maryland, my family did not go to Ocean City, Maryland this year. However, some of our extended family members did go. So we lived vicariously through them. Not by asking them how the weather was at the beach, because actually it wasn't that great a summer some days at the beach. Not by looking at their photos on their smartphones. Mostly we asked them what they ate on the boardwalk. Tell us, please. You see, my family has a routine as we make our way across the boardwalk from the inlet parking lot. First stop is Dumpster's Dairyland for a chocolate milkshake. Now, I didn't say dumpsters. I said dumpsters, D-U-M-S-E-R-S. Frankly, dumpsters gives a whole different feel for the taste of food. And if I were Dumpster, I would have changed my name a long time ago when I began that business. But it's called Dumpster's Dairyland, and that's the first stop, chocolate milkshakes. The next stop is Thrasher's French fries. And that's where we usually grouse about how the price went up for a medium-sized bucket, but that's okay, we'll pay for it, and don't you put vinegar on my portion, okay? No vinegar. We walk a bit further, we're munching on our fries, and then we get to the Atlantic stand. And at the Atlantic stand, there are hot dogs, and they're split down the middle, and they're grilled, and they put them in a soft, steamed bun. Now, we're full by then, but see, we'll walk the rest of the way up the boardwalk and the rest of the way back, and thus we feel totally righteous about picking up a bucket of Fisher's caramel popcorn. And while we're there, we might as well go next door and stop at Dolly's and get a box of saltwater taffy for the road. So, no, Randy and I did not get to Ocean City, Maryland this year. We just had to content ourselves with asking our relatives about their journey up and down the boardwalk, and we salivated as they told us. Of course, you really should only eat at the most a week's worth of that food, maybe only a few days. It's really not that good for you. You can't live on junk food. A body cannot be sustained well with that kind of stuff, but it's enjoyable for a few days, and it does draw you back, and perhaps next summer we'll head to the beach. Now today, we're in the middle of a 5-week set of Bible readings where we've been talking about food, about bread specifically. This is the 6th chapter of the Gospel of John, and we actually have a name for this set of readings over 5 weeks. We call it the Bread of Life Discourse. It began 2 weeks ago, for those of you who were here, with the story of the miracle where Jesus fed 5,000, a crowd of 5,000, with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And then the following week, which in the story as you go through John 6 was really just the next day, the crowds come back and they look for Jesus and then they follow him to where he has gone. But honestly, they're just looking for another meal. They're really just looking to be fed. It's not so much about him. Yet when they follow him, Jesus begins to teach them. He begins to teach them about what real, sustained nourishment is like, and what this kind of life is that he offers them. Now, the bread and fish surely are not junk food. I'm not telling you that the bread and fish that he offered them were junk food. But the way the crowd seeks out that bread and fish the next day is in that same hungry, misguided mindset that you and I have when we long for the calorie-laden, sugar-coated, deep-fried stuff you can find on the boardwalk, and it draws us there. The crowds could care less about the person who provided the food, they just wanted the food. So, in last week's reading, week 2, and continuing in the 3rd week, this week, Jesus is beginning to teach the crowds that real nourishment comes from him, and that it is nourishment from God. This week's reading reiterates what you heard last week, which was when Jesus said, I'm the living bread that came down from heaven. And both last week and this week we read the same verse. We read verse 35, which begins, I am the bread of life. Jesus is declaring here that he is not junk food, but rather he's the very one who can sustain our lives, the whole of our lives. And the problem is now with Jesus' teaching is that by the time you get to this third week of readings, Jesus is turning some people off. People are questioning what he's saying. It isn't that the people aren't hungry. It isn't that they don't want to be nourished. They just don't realize what they're hungry for. They're confused by Jesus' words. They become hostile to him. In fact, in today's reading, you notice that there were some of the Jewish people in the crowd who start complaining about Jesus to one another. Just who does he think he is? All high and mighty, I am the bread of life. We know where he comes from. We know his family. And our reading today concludes with Jesus' bold response to all their skepticism, all their hostility. And this is what he said. It was the last part I read. Whoever eats of this bread will live forever. And the bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh. Next week, you'll hear the reaction of the people to those fighting words from Jesus. So come back to hear it. But if you want a sneak preview, of their reaction, here's what writer Paul Strobel says. Strobel looks at this bread of life discourse and he compares these listeners to children who are being served something for supper they just don't recognize. And they immediately screw up their faces and say, what is this? That's next week's reading. So as you and I move along through chapter 6 here in John, we're hearing Jesus' words about his flesh as bread. And we can understand them, especially as Lutherans, we can understand them as a very theologically rich discussion of the meal of Holy Communion, which was a discussion going on in the early church at the time this gospel was written. And on the one level, that's a very good understanding. It's a discussion about the Lord's Supper. Yes. But it's more than that. I wouldn't want to limit Jesus' words here to solely a discussion about Holy Communion. His words about our receiving him, having him abide in us and fill us up, points us back to him, the one who gave his body and blood on the cross. His words point us to the possibility that we might even have a relationship with this one, crucified and risen. A relationship that actually can grow deeper, grow more rich, as we are continually nourished by him. See, from the start of chapter 6, Jesus is inviting people to follow him, inviting people into that kind of relationship with him. So at the beginning of chapter 6, he started with the miraculous banquet. That kind of whetted their appetite, literally, okay? Filled their bellies, make them hunger for more, even if they aren't quite certain what they're hungry for, even if they think they only need to come back the next day for a dinner, even if the bread and fish are not going to stay in their bellies more than a few hours. Jesus just keeps on drawing them back to him. In the process, he frustrates, angers, and disappoints some, but he also intrigues and compels others to come to him. So maybe there's something to be said about all this repetition, about Jesus' words that come to us. I know it's silly to say it, but Jesus is being redundant over and over again. And that's the way of being really redundant. But that's essentially what's happening here. Jesus invites, feeds, teaches, repeats. How many times does Jesus have to say, I am the bread of life, until we believe it and believe him, until we trust him and follow him? When are we finally going to get it? Well, John's Gospel, with all of its repetition here, wants us to know Jesus plans on reminding us about this until the cows come home, or until we come home to him, or until repetition can be a very useful thing. Our Wednesday community meal is a wonderful example of needful repetition. We invite anyone and everyone in the community to come and eat, beginning with a prayer that gives praise to the Holy One who provided that nourishment, and then offering a brief worship at the end of the meal if people choose to stay. The casseroles, the sandwiches, the cake squares, maybe they won't remain in the bellies for more than a few hours, but it's a start. It's a way to draw people in closer to God through tasty food, through kindly fellowship. We just invite, feed, and repeat. And all the while, Jesus Christ is meeting up with them through us. So too, ironically, Jesus Christ is meeting up with us through them. Think about that for a minute. I have a good friend who's involved in a ministry in Harrisburg called Do-Over Ministries. The goal is to help bring people suffering from addiction into treatment. Invite the folks on the streets who are addicted to things, invite them into seeking treatment and to fight against their addiction. The first thing the leaders of this ministry end up doing is they end up meeting the folks where they are, in the alleys in Harrisburg or under the bridges, and finding them, they give them food or clothing or other things that they just need for daily existence. Now, my friend says that there are some volunteers who become frustrated with this ministry because, see, they want to be assured of the outcomes, right? They want to know that X number of people that they talk with that day on the streets of Harrisburg will say, sign me up, I want to go into treatment, I'm ready to give up my booze or my drugs. Well, those volunteers are going to be disappointed because they do not yet realize repetition is needed. They do not yet realize the addict may first only want the sandwich, or the clean socks, or the blanket, and for a time will come back only for those things. And those volunteers may grow reluctant about providing the sandwich here, the socks there, when progress doesn't seem to be made. But here's the thing. It may take a long, long time for that addict on the street to realize their hunger is for something more. A new life, a second chance, a breaking of the chains of addiction, a growing relationship with a loving God. So my friend says that if you plan to volunteer for Do-Over Ministries, be prepared to invite, feed, and repeat. I'm glad we're here today, together, smack dab in the middle of the long, repetitious bread of life discourse that is taking over about a third of our summer Sundays. Come back next week for more of the same, because here is where Jesus invites us, and teaches, feeds, and repeats. Amen.